Welcome to the Anne Frank exhibition and event. It's a traveling exhibition, you may have heard about that. We are, in a period of 3 weeks, visiting 4 schools here in Santa Fe. And it is, last week it was at Desert Academy. This week it was at Santa Fe High. Next week, or as starting tomorrow actually, it will be at Monte del Sol. And next week it will be in the Mandela International School. Together with quite a number of people, we took the initiative to do this. So again, very much welcome. I was born in 1946, 1 year after the war. In gratitude to the American soldiers who liberated my town in Holland, my parents gave me an American first name, John. Up to today, I carry that name with pride and gratitude to the United States, where I live now since 10 years. I lived the largest part of my life in Amsterdam, the city of Anne Frank. A city where the history of the Second World War and what happened to the Jewish population is very alive and very present through musea, monuments, etc. So when the Consul General asked me if we would be willing, with a number of people here, to organize this event in this exhibition, I felt very privileged to do that. You can imagine that. Tonight, through this exhibition, you will be confronted with the ugly side of intolerance, of discrimination, of exclusion, about the times of Nazi Germany. But not only that, you will also be confronted with the ugly face of intolerance, exclusion, and discrimination today through the testimony of a number of students. However, I also wish to share with you a quote from the book, The Diary of Anne Frank, in which she wrote, "In spite of everything, I still believe that people are really good at heart." That is the message of tonight as well. Thank you for your attention. I'll give the word to the Consul General of the Netherlands.
Well, thank you, John, and welcome, everyone. Thank you all for being here tonight to welcome the traveling exhibition Anne Frank, A History for Today. And first, I would like to express my gratitude to the students, of course, because they made it possible to share today the story of Anne Frank, and they shared it at their schools. And I think, and I believe it's fair to say, you made it possible here, and you really are so important to spread the message. So I would like to thank you for all your effort in being a peer guide and being so helpful in making this possible in Santa Fe. I would like to extend a special welcome to the Mayor of Santa Fe, Ellen Weber. Thank you so much for being here tonight with us. David Felberg of the Santa Fe Symphony, and Gary Friedman. And you'll speak later to us. And I extend my gratitude to the New Mexico Human Rights Project that initiated the exhibition to New Mexico in a way that they brought the exhibition to Albuquerque and Las Cruces. And after visiting these 2 places, the exhibition came to Santa Fe, thanks to John. Thank you, John. And together with the help of Sarah Irvine, you made it possible that we all knew about it via social media. I think it is very important. This is spreading the message. And thank you for organizing this event today. I understand, John, that you will travel to Amsterdam later this year, in May, to visit the Anne Frank House again. And I know, and I can share that with you, they will give you a special recognition for all of your work. Thank you so much for your work. Well, the Consul General of the Netherlands in San Francisco teamed up with the Anne Frank House in Amsterdam to bring this exhibition all over the West Coast. We started in San Francisco, November 2017. And then we brought the exhibition to Hawaii, Alaska, Sacramento, Phoenix, Los Angeles, and now it has arrived here in Santa Fe. It will even travel further. I promise it will travel to Denver, other places at the West Coast. But I'm so pleased that we tonight can sort of celebrate, if I may use that we have the sort of traveling exhibition here in New Mexico with the wonderful support of the local community. And I have to admit that we haven't had a crowd so large as today. So thank you for being with such huge numbers. Thank you for that. So the Netherlands and the United States, you might know that, we share a history over more than 400 years, based on shared values and a shared history. John spoke about that. So Anne Frank, our Dutch icon, is also part of this story, of this history. Because we share the same values. We share the values of tolerance, freedom, inclusiveness. But how do we apply these values in our own lives? I believe we should continue to ask ourselves this question. And the lessons we learn from Anne Frank, they should not fall into oblivion. And this history should not be forgotten. You know, a recent poll states that 22% of American youth had never heard about the Holocaust. So I think it's so important that we have these kind of events, that we have the peer guides to share the story, and that we sort of spread a message. Not only here in New Mexico, in the US, in Europe, all over the globe. Especially in these times when discrimination and exclusion are once again very relevant. Like millions of people all over the world, I've read the diary of Anne Frank. And her story teaches us about the horrific persecution of the Jews during the Second World War. And she shows us the most human and vulnerable side of the consequences of discrimination and exclusion. However, and I think with John, her story also urges us to never give up on our dreams and to have the courage to be ourselves. Anne's story reflects the foundation of basic human rights, and its incredible relevance still resonates in society today. This exhibition, that's the reason for the Netherlands Consulate to do all this, encourage the youth to form their own opinions on how to challenge these issues of discrimination and exclusion. It gives the students, I hope, the opportunity to interpret the themes of diversity and justice in their own way, and how they fit in their own personal context. I find it truly amazing to see how some of the schools here in New Mexico have embraced this exhibition. And my favorite aspect of the exhibition is the peer-to-peer guidance. I find it amazing that it's possible for the peers to guide other students and tell the story, to relive the story together. In this way, they get to discuss Anne's story with a peer. And you know, the good thing is even Anne Frank House comes over to train these students, so they're well trained to do the job. In my opinion, this is really the best way to keep the story alive. I hope that through this exhibition we can continue to spread a message of hope and determination. Ladies and gentlemen, Anne's talent and writings brings us together tonight. And I would like to conclude by sharing one of her many inspirational quotes with you. Wednesday, April 5, 1944. I don't want to have lived in vain like most people. I want to be useful or bring enjoyment to all people, even those I've never met. I want to go on living even after my death. Thank you very much. Thank you, and it's now my great pleasure to introduce to you the Mayor of Santa Fe. So please, Mayor, we'd like to ask you to give your statement to your own community. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Consul General, and thank you, John. We owe a great debt of gratitude to John and to the Consul General, to the Netherlands as a country and as a friend, and it's a great honor and a great pleasure for me to be here on a stage with our flags side by side, with the state of New Mexico flag, with our friends in the audience. John, thank you for your determination to make this happen. It would not have happened without you, Mr. Consul General, without your commitment to make sure that New Mexico and Santa Fe was part of this exhibit. It's a truly monumental achievement to bring it to Santa Fe. John has, I think, the best quote of the night so far, and that was Anne Frank's quote. In spite of everything, I really believe that people are good at heart. You look at that face, and you look at the young people who will be with us on stage tonight and their faces, nothing divides them except time. Nothing divides them in terms of their hopes and their aspirations and their opportunity to make a difference in the world, like the quote you just read to us. Every so often, it seems in the affairs of the world, as Franklin Roosevelt once observed, the cycle comes around and countries and people are challenged to step up and show courage. It happened in the 1930s and the 1940s. It's happening now in our own country and around the world. It's happening in our state as our own immigrants are afflicted by policies that attempt to punish them for being immigrants and to separate them from their families at the border, to close the border, to take kids away from their parents. It happens in the cycle of human events, and it also happens every single day. It doesn't wait for 30 or 40 years to happen. It happens every day. And just as this exhibit reminds us, as Anne Frank's diary reminds us, as visiting the Anne Frank house reminds us, we are all individually and collectively challenged to decide what we're going to do about it. Where do we stand? How much of a difference do we want to make? And how much courage are we prepared to show on behalf of human values and human rights? I am very, very proud that Santa Fe is a sanctuary city. And that we will remain a sanctuary city for the future, for our kids and their kids. That's not going to change. But we need to consider every single day what it means to be a sanctuary city. It doesn't come automatically, and it doesn't happen often only in dramatic ways. It happens in small ways. It happens in ICE raids on our employees, in kitchens and in hotels, in police stops by ICE agents pretending to be Santa Fe police officers. It happens in people suffering wage theft and having to do it in silence because they're afraid of their immigrant status. So you're right, Mr. General Counsel, history is alive today. History doesn't exist in the past. History exists every single moment as we both live it and as we make it. And it is not an accident that you are seeing in Santa Fe the biggest turnout of any city you've brought this to. That is because Santa Fe is a city of compassion and a city of connection and a city of caring. And I believe that this exhibit and its lesson to our young people in schools and here tonight will live on. The conversation will continue. It will continue to resonate in our community, and it will continue to remind us that every single one of us has a chance to make a difference to stand up with courage and to fulfill what Anne wanted us to remember, which is, in spite of everything, people are good at heart. That's true in Santa Fe. Let's continue to make that true every single day. Thank you.
The theme from Schindler's List. For those who have not seen the movie, I would like to say a few words to you about this movie. It is a film about Oskar Schindler, a German businessman who saved the lives of more than 1,000 Polish Jewish people by employing them in his factories in Krakow. He was very motivated to do that. I give a quote from Oskar Schindler himself about that. He said, "I hated the brutality, the sadism and the insanity of Nazism. I just couldn't stand by and see people destroyed. I did what I could, what I had to do, which my conscience told me that I had to do it. That's all there is to it. Really, nothing more than that." We're very grateful to have this group here tonight. All of them so gracefully said yes to our invitation to play here. David Felberg is the concertmaster of the Santa Fe Symphony Orchestra. Carla is a violinist at the same orchestra. Dana is the principal cellist, right here behind me. And we're very happy. They're both also teachers, one at St. Michael's and the other one at the Mandela International School. And the students that you see here tonight are from the Mandela International School. And they're all from the grades 9 to 12. We welcome all of them. Carla has a very amazing and interesting story about her violin, and she promised me to share it with us.
Thank you, John. Thank you to all the organizers, to the mayor, the Consul General, the principal, and one of our teachers from the Mandela International School. Thank you for giving us this opportunity. I want to thank the students for being here and playing so beautifully that you'll hear in a minute. My name is Carla Kunst. I'm a violinist in the symphony, as you mentioned, and I also am the orchestra director at the Mandela International School. And I have a special connection to the whole Anne Frank story. I also want to mention my daughter's making a little guest appearance tonight. She's the 7th grader here. But my family, on my mother's side, my grandparents grew up in Germany. My grandfather, my opa, was a virtuoso violinist. He was given a violin when he was 16. He went on to become a very talented surgeon and doctor. And he was working in Berlin before the war and was told to work at the Jewish hospital. Then he was told by his chief at the Jewish hospital that it was time to leave Germany. So he and his wife, my Oma, and their 3-year-old son got out of Berlin in 1938, about 3 months before Kristallnacht. They took a ship to New York City. They brought their son and a violin that my grandfather was given when he was 16. I was given that violin when I was 14 and have been playing it ever since. It's a wonderful violin that I feel very privileged to play. And tonight I have actually asked one of my students to play it since I'll be conducting. And so Olivia Hogan is playing the violin that was brought from Berlin in 1938. And I have a picture I'll leave up here if you guys want to see it as part of the exhibit of my grandfather playing that same violin. So thank you again, everyone, for coming.
Sage is 10th grade? Good. 10th grade, Santa Fe High?
Yes, Santa Fe High.
And then when I emailed Reed Mashevsky, the head of theater at Santa Fe High, inviting them, Santa Fe High, to host this exhibition as well, amongst other schools, he replied, "You better come to our theater tonight." Which, of course, I did. And to my big surprise, there were the students as actors playing the theater play of the Diary of Anne Frank. Things happen for a reason. Anyway, you were playing the main part, Anne Frank, and maybe you can tell us a little bit about the stage that you played in, because it was rather special.
Yeah. So basically, the stage, it was the most amazing set we'd ever worked with. We had a very talented set director that came and worked with us for it, and we had a lot of things in it that people may not have normally noticed, like the skyline in the background had one of Anne's favorite things to listen to, the Westertoren, which she talks about in her diary, and for example, the diaries that she wrote in, on our set were almost identical to the ones that she wrote in. It was red and white checkered.
All right, let's listen to two monologues I think you're going to play for us from the Diary of Anne Frank. Thank you so much for being here, Sage. Thank you.
Friday, 21st of August, 1942. I expect I should be describing what it feels like to go into hiding, but I really don't know yet myself. I only know it's funny, never to be able to go outdoors, never to breathe fresh air, never to run and shout and jump. It's the silence in the night that frightens me the most. Every time I hear a creak in the house or a step on the street outside, I'm sure they're coming for us. The days aren't so bad. At least we know that Meep and Mr. Kroll are down there below us in the office. Our protectors, we call them. I asked Father what would happen to them if the Nazis were to find out that they were hiding us. Pim said that they would suffer the same fate that we would. Imagine. They know this, and yet when they come up here, they're always cheerful and gay as if there were nothing in the world to bother them. Today I'm going to tell you our general news. Mother is unbearable. She insists on treating me like a baby, which I loathe. Otherwise, things are going better. The 4th of August, 1944. And so it seems our stay here is over. They are waiting for us now. They've given us 5 minutes to pack our bags and what they will hold of clothing. Nothing else. And so, dear diary, that means I must leave you behind. Goodbye for a while. P.S. Please, Meep or Mr. Crawler or anyone else, if you were to find this diary, will you please keep it safe for me? Because someday I hope.
Thank you, Sage. With that talent, we'll definitely hear more from you in the future. Our next guest tonight is Gary Friedman. It was in February that Gary and I spoke for the first time about this event, and we were dreaming up a plan that his father would be giving the testimony here as a Holocaust survivor. Sadly, his father died in the meantime, between our meeting and our event tonight. So tonight is not only, in my view, a testimony from Gary as the son of a Holocaust survivor, but also a tribute to his father. Okay.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you, John and Consul General, for letting me speak this evening. My father, Norbert Friedman, a survivor of the Holocaust, was born in Krakow, Poland on December 20th, 1922. He died this past February at the age of 96. My talk tonight is dedicated to him, as well as to the memory of Anne Frank and the 6 million Jews who perished in the Holocaust. My father grew up the son of a kosher butcher, and although he excelled scholastically and scored well on the entrance exams, he was barred from entering engineering school due to educational quotas in Poland for Jews. After the Nazis invaded Poland in 1939, he eluded capture until June of 1942, when he and his father Joseph were sent to Mielec concentration camp. On June 16th, 1942, the SS surrounded the Polish village where my father and his family were living and announced, "If the able-bodied men will volunteer for work in a labor camp, the women, children, and the elderly will be spared deportation and will be allowed to remain in their homes." My father, his 2 uncles, his father Joseph, agreed to volunteer in order to save their families. The scene at the village square was chaotic, to say the least. So many people were saying goodbye while the SS loaded others onto the trucks. My father's mother hugged him tightly and kissed him. "May God be with you. We may never see you again," she prophetically declared. "Kiss your brother goodbye," she cried to my dad's younger brother, Oscar. 4 weeks later, the Germans marched that entire community to a railroad station, loaded them into cattle cars, and shipped them to an extermination camp in Belzec, Poland, where on the 23rd of July, 1942, approximately 50 members of my father's family who were on that transport were murdered, including his mother, Gusta, his brother, Oscar, his grandparents, uncles, aunts, and cousins. All of them perished in the crematories of Belzec, sharing the fate of 600,000 other Jewish men, women, and children who died there. My father, his 2 uncles, and his father Joseph survived the war. My dad was imprisoned in 11 concentration camps before he was liberated by the American Army on May 1st, 1945. As the American forces advanced closer to Ganakar, the final camp of my father's long imprisonment, the Nazis ordered the inmates to march out of the camp. This tormenting death march went on for days, and many of my father's fellow prisoners died from exhaustion or were shot if they could not continue. During the march, one of my father's close friends, Oscar Klausenstock, was running a high fever and could not barely put one foot in front of the other. Knowing Oscar's fate if he collapsed, my father helped hide his friend in a trench alongside the road, covering him up with leaves and dirt, risking his own life during the process. As the sounds of heavy guns seemed closer, the guards appeared more nervous. The SS commandant explained that they were surrounded by enemy forces and that every SS guard was to take 5 or 6 prisoners and hide with them in any farmhouse they could find. On the last day of his captivity, my father, his 2 uncles, his father Joseph, and a few others slept in a barn, guarded by a Hungarian SS soldier who had agreed not to harm them in exchange for being treated fairly later. They woke to the sounds of tanks rumbling by and they peeked through the barn boards. They saw an amazing sight. 3 large tanks slowly rolling toward the village. On the side of the tanks were 5 pointed stars and soldiers marching behind them. Russians, Russians, my father's group cried, at first misled by the stars. No, no, Americana, the guard explained. My father, because he knew a few words of English, was chosen to venture into the nearby town where he came upon his American liberators. He was free at last. During his 3 years of imprisonment, my father was beaten, starved, tortured, and was subjected to and witnessed countless acts of cruelty and horror. He barely survived, weighing only 80 pounds at the end of the war. A haggard and dirty human scarecrow, draped with rags loosely hanging down from his shapeless, bony frame. Upon being liberated, my father worked as a translator for the 35th Tank Battalion of the U.S. Army, and then he attended Frankfurt University with his friend Oskar Klausenstock, who he had assisted during the Death March. In 1950, he immigrated to the United States, first living in Atlanta, Georgia, and then moving to the East Coast. My father was a gifted storyteller who began to give testimony in the early 1970s. Our rabbi in West Hempstead, New York, was encouraging him to share his experiences. The rabbi thought it would ease the emotional burden that weighed on my father. It was not easy at first, but when some of my friends asked my dad to speak at their school, he said yes. My father was a fixture in the New York community and later in the Atlanta community with his moving Holocaust testimony and commitment to Jewish causes and social justice. In 1996, he became an educator and speaker with the Museum of Jewish Heritage in New York and lectured in educational institutions ranging from public schools to universities to military bases such as the United States Air Force Academy, as well as churches and synagogues. My father published a memoir called Sunrays at Midnight in 2006, and later a book of short stories called Sappy Tales and Silent Screams. I wasn't sure about my dad's title on that, but he liked it. He moved to Atlanta in 2010 and then was an active speaker at the William Bremen Museum of Jewish Heritage. Over the past 50 years, my father has spoken to and inspired hundreds of thousands of people from all ages and backgrounds with his testimony of courage, inclusion, faith, and hope. From his past, he tried to derive positive lessons for the future. He spoke against bias, against racism, and the catastrophic consequences of such beliefs and attitudes. He spoke often of his duty to, quote-unquote, bear witness to the events of that fateful era and to draw positive lessons from man's most tragic experience. When answering audiences' questions about the human condition in concentration camps, my father discovered a truth more basic, more important than anything else he had learned in his life. Namely, that righteousness and goodness of one person can be life-saving in its power. That it can save life, even in the horrific, suffocating existence of the camps. As my dad explained, we saw flashes of mercy, and we managed, in our desperation, to share that mercy among us. Thanks to these sparks of spirit, our past and our future could hold the possibility of meaning and hope. One story that my dad spoke of that exemplified these qualities of righteousness and goodness was the story of Reb Meyer Katz. Please allow me to share that story with you. Reb Meyer Katz came to our camp in 1942. Though small in size, an aura of sweet, quiet strength radiated from him. His manner of speech was soft and reassuring. He could often be seen in quiet, solitary prayer, a silhouette in shadows of the darkened barracks, a lonely testimony of man's faith in God against the background of Satan's landscape. Somehow, Reb Meyer was able to get a job working in the fields, from where he would smuggle in, at the risk of being shot, vegetables and fruit for the ill. We were assembled for a transport from Biela concentration camp to some other unknown destination, 24 cattle cars in all. The cattle cars we were shoved into offered us little room to move, very little air to breathe through the 4 small steel-barred windows. We designed a system of rotation in our car so that each person, at least for a short period, could stand by a window to revive himself. There were no sanitary facilities, so with our fingers and our spoons, we had to tear a hole in the floor. The August heat was taking its toll. Men were fainting, and feverish cries for Wasser, Wasser, water, water, punctuated the thin air. The thirst and the stench were becoming unbearable. On the second night, 2 men took poison, and their corpses were propped up against the wall so not to take up as much space. On the third day, without food and water, the train stopped at a railroad station. Fate so willed it that at the end of our car, it was Reb Meyer Katz's turn to be at the window facing the station. Miraculously, one of the nurses heard Meyer's plea and handed him a bottle of water. The men in the cabin all surged frantically towards Reb Meyer. Without bringing the bottle to his own lips, Reb Meyer moved it to the mouth of the man next to him, and in his caring voice implored him, "Drink, drink, mein Kind, nur a klein bisschen. Take only a little sip, my child," he said to him. And then he went on to the next person, and so on, until the bottle was empty. As if mesmerized, the men stopped pushing. Those close by immediately took one swallow or two until the bottle was empty. Human dignity and sanity slowly returned. There was no complaints, only weeping and sobbing. Reb Meyer's personal sacrifice and care for his fellow man had given us all a victorious ascent from our hellish condition back into man's dignity. Now, here we are in 2019, more than 70 years since the Holocaust occurred. And as others have mentioned this evening, we continue to witness man's cruel injustices towards one another, rooted in hatred and ethnic cleansing. Several weeks before my father died, he said to me, "Son, the forest is thinning." I understood at once what he was talking about, that my father's generation is dying off now. That first-hand accounts of the events of the Holocaust are becoming scarcer and scarcer. Despite facing the terrible evil and hatred of the Nazis, both Anne Frank and my father maintained their sense of humanity and decency, and they recognized the need to tell their story. More than ever, the message of compassion, tolerance, and hope for the future conveyed by the famous writings of Anne Frank needs to be shared with the world. My dad spoke 8 languages. However, the one universal language that touched me and others who knew him or listened to him was the language of love and hope. He filled our souls with his compassion, his kindness, and his belief in the human spirit, that we could be better, and that together we could repair the world. It is a duty shared by all of us. Thank you.
Thank you, Gary, for your moving story. Gary was very much talking about the Holocaust and the happenings in those times. And we have tonight a testimony, actually two, one after this one as well, which will tell you that these things are still happening today. And I would like to invite Hakima Amiri and Ma Bagun Hazimadi to the stage. I'm sorry, I have to look at your names to say it right. Two Afghan teenagers from the Hazara ethnic group arrived in Santa Fe early January. As part of Desert Academy's efforts with United World Colleges in Montezuma to offer women from rural parts of Afghanistan the opportunity to learn skills and concepts that they can one day use to help implement change in their home countries. That's why they're here. Coming from a place where women have fewer rights than men and where violence against Hazara people, a group native to central Afghanistan, has been the norm since the 16th century. Hakima and Mabegum said they wanted to use their experience in New Mexico to help women in their country. Hazara people have been persecuted for years, most recently by Taliban and Al-Qaeda. Hakima and Megum said they remember a time in Afghanistan where the bombs were everywhere. We would like to listen to your testimony. Thank you.
Sorry. I just need a little time.
Yeah, all Dutchmen are tall.
Okay, first of all, thank you everybody for coming here, and thanks, John. I'm a bit nervous, but I hope I don't forget the things I want to say today. So, Anne Frank's story it's a really sad story, and listening to it and seeing that what man and human beings can do to each other it really needs the heart to actually be able to listen to that. But to me, what's even more sad is that this story is not a history, it's a present. And seeing that story in Afghanistan. Each day, when my father was coming home, evening, seeing his face and running up to him and saying, "Dad, did you get the job?" He went to different ministries. But me and my siblings would see that the same expression on his face each and every evening that he returned home. Seeing that young Hazara women are being raped by other people from different ethnic groups just because they were different and they were from another ethnic group. Or seeing that young girls are being married to, 10-year-old girls are being married to 60-year-old people. Or seeing the bodies of young people only trying young Hazara people, young Hazara students, their only purpose is to study and seeing their bodies laid on the floor. They get out of the house with such high hopes. They say, today I'm going to go and I'm going to learn, but never knowing that they won't come back. Seeing all those tragedies, they remind me of Anne Frank's story. They tell me that no, Anne Frank's story, it's not a history anymore. It's still it's happening right now in different places, and there's racism, and it's continuing, and our hope is that someday it will end. And I would like to hand over the rest of my friend Begum, who will share to you guys an experiment of hers as a Hazara woman.
Thank you. Thank you, Hakima. Thank you, everyone, for being here and having me tonight. Good night, everyone. Yeah, good night, everyone. So I used to learn English, so if I made mistakes, so just sorry. Okay. Yes, as she said, Anne Frank's story, like, I remember that one day I got a flash USB from my brother's room, and then I said that I want to watch some English movie because I want to learn English. And then he said that you can pick up my flash, and then you can. I hope you could find some English movie. When I opened that flash, there was like a documentary. I watched that, and I didn't understand a lot. Now I remember it was the factory that there was a man who used to protect the Jewish people on that time. So it was like a kind of sad, but not at all. Like I used to get on those stories, like it was happening, and it wasn't like new things or surprise for. And I'm sure if it was like American kid, on that time I was 9th grade, it was so surprise thing for them. And then maybe for their parents, how a 10th grade or 9th grade students could watch that documentary. So, yes, my name is Begum. I'm from Afghanistan, and from a remote area of Afghanistan, Daikundi. And then I was, the traditional continuing of my family and a remote area. And I used to work hard, walking to school and everything, but nothing was hard for me because I cannot explain. My best friend, my everything in the world, my mom. I'm sorry. Nothing was hard on that time for me, and there was not a lot of like title thing because we were in a small village in a remote area. There was no book for studying, and there was not like war happening a lot on that time. Since I was 8th grade, I moved to like a bigger city, and I used to like know there are different ethnic group, different people, so we cannot like say hello even to everyone that we saw around. So it was a little bit. When I moved to Kabul, and it gets better. It gets like more than that. Like I have to learn how to behave for example, in a public school, so that there is kids from all around the country, from all ethnic group in Afghanistan, and those stuff. And then for 1 year it was good, but it gets worse. It gets worse a lot. We just saw our friends one day, and then we couldn't see him or her again. What was happening? We could saw them in a TV show and like in a news. What happened? Explosion happened. He or she died. So they were just happening, and they were the baddest thing that I used to like watch them. And during getting visa, one day I was just waiting for picking up my visa. Also, waiting is so hard. And then I got an email from US Embassy, and then they asked me to go and pick up my visa. it was so far from our home. And then I got there, I was late, the embassy was closed, and I used to go back home. There was no taxi driver that was from our ethnic group, like Ethnic Hazara. There was other, but I couldn't trust them, and I didn't get a taxi. I used to walk, and then a policeman just jumped behind me and then say hello, and I said, hello, is your job to follow me? I said, yes, my job is like protecting you. I said, thank you, I'm good, I can walk, and I will find a taxi, I will go home. And then when I saw his face, he was not Hazara, and he was just following me, and then I walked faster, he walked faster, and then I just ran, and then he ran. I didn't remember how long I ran. I just ran a lot. When I stopped, I wasn't able to like stand with my feet. A woman came, and then she brought water, and she said, "Are you okay? What happened to you? What happened?" I said, I'm okay. She said, "You're not okay. What's going on? What happened? Is there some explosion happened?" I said, "No explosion. I'm okay." And then she got a taxi, and she drove me up to in the home. And when I got home, I told my brother, have ever come of my mouth. And then he said that, don't tell everything to me. The only problem is you're a Hazara woman. That thing happened to you today as a Hazara woman. If there was a man, like a Hazara man, a bad man, I believe that he didn't do that man do that to you today. So there are kind of things that happened for me a lot. It was in 2014, I used to like run a photo exhibition, and then in Kabul University, the boss of the university was a Pashtun, and I used to like get his signature for running that exhibition. I need that. And I go for 3 days, I go there, and I wait for 4 hours every day. And I ask him, can you please sign this one? Or say, I don't want to sign, I have to find another place. And then he said, you know what? You Hazara child, from the beginning, when you're 7 years old, you're a problem for us up to now. You're a school student, you have to study math, you have to study chemistry, you have to be in those classes while you're here. I cannot sign that now. I have a meeting. And I promised myself, if I couldn't get his signature, I will change my name. And I go for 2 more days, and at the end I got his signature. And then what I want to say that if Anna Frank didn't write his story, his diary, she was not alive today. Today there was not this much people to like read her story, go out for training, and like she was die, but because of writing his story, he's alive today. She's alive today. She didn't die. And I want to say that we have to be alive like her. We shouldn't like get those things so hard for ourselves. Like that day, I remember the day the man followed me. I told my brother, I don't want to go out. I don't need that visa, and I want to be at home. He said that, yes, I know that you just be at home, and then you will be a regular wife or housewife. That's the only thing that you can do. Yes, I want to hear that one. You go for school for that one. You feel that like running out just every day, walking to school for just saying that I don't need that visa. I was like his speech that changed my mind to go back to pick up my visa and come here. Thank you for listening to me.
Thank you both for your courage to stand here and give this testimony to all of us. I would like to invite Axel to the stage here. Axel Lozoya, who will also give us a testimony what is happening in in our days. Axel is a student at the Monte del Sol School, one of the 4 schools which is hosting this Anne Frank exhibition. When he saw the exhibition, he felt that there was a story to tell to all of you about his own family. His parents are Mexican immigrants, and his brother is what we call a dreamer. His brother is unsure about his future in our country. Axel feels there is a relationship between the Anne Frank story and what the dreamers are facing here at the moment. Thank you, Axel, for having the courage to share the story with us. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Good afternoon. As John said, my name is Axel Ozoya. I am attending Monte del Sol Charter School, and I'm currently in the 10th grade. When I agreed to be part of this important exhibit, I began to think about how I relate to Anne Frank's experience. When I think about the Holocaust, I think about families that were broken, hopes and dreams that were lost. I think about the people who tried to change this experience for the victims and how they were crushed. As I think about the perpetrators, I think about hatred and the nature of hatred. I think about being forced to do something in order to keep yourself and your family safe. The experience of Anne Frank speaks to me on a few levels. For one, I am close to the age that she was. It makes it easier for me to truly understand what her life might have been like. Secondly, I am a member of an immigrant family, and I believe that the immigrant experience closely parallels the experience and lessons of Anne Frank. My father worked in Mexico from an early age. When my father married my mother and they had my older brother, my parents were on their own. My father came to America and worked for 2 months before he was able to bring my mother and brother along. For this time of period, my mother constantly lived in a future, fearing what would happen next and yearning to know that we would have a chance at a bright future. This must have been how Anne's parents and most parents of victims in the Holocaust felt. Soon after they moved here, my mom's brother passed away. I know that she has always felt guilt and pain over the fact that she wasn't there. She has felt responsible for that and never had a chance to say goodbye. This pain is paralleled by so many families' experiences in the Holocaust. After about 8 years, my mother and older brother were no longer able to go back and forth from here to Mexico. This was so painful for them because staying connected to who you are and where you came from is so important to identity. Half of us are able to return to Mexico and half of my family are not. I know there is a fear and struggle every time any of us enter or leave Mexico. My older brother is a dreamer who made my family and Monte del Sol proud. He was the first grandson to go to college and received a full-ride soccer scholarship. Currently, his future is unknown, and I know that he, like Anne Frank, goes between dreams and fears every day. The uncertainty can be so painful. Poet Pan Mora says the following about the immigrant experience. Immigrants wrap their babies in American flags. Feed them mashed hot dogs and apple pie. Name them Billy and Daisy. Buy them blonde dolls that blink blue eye, or a soccer ball and a tiny cleats before the baby can even walk. Speak to them in thick English. Hello, baby, hello. Whisper in Spanish or Polish. When the baby sleeps, whisper in a dark parent bed. That dark parent fear. Will they like our boy, our girl, our fine American boy, our fine American girl? Not only do my parents struggle with access to their family, but they had to resolve the internal conflict of how to raise children in two cultures. Do they sacrifice their identity within their children for better opportunities? I feel like Jews and other victims in the Holocaust had to struggle between loving and hating their identities. When I think about immigration and my own family stories, the quote from Anne Frank in particular stands out to me. It's difficult in times like these. Ideals, dreams and cherished hopes rise within us, only to be crushed by grim reality. It's a wonder I haven't abandoned all my ideals. They seem so absurd and impractical. Yet, I cling to them because I still believe, in spite of everything, that people are truly good at heart. This quote speaks to the feeling of families all over the world who are leaving their homes in search of a better life. This must remain faithful to the hope that humans are truly good at heart. It is so important for people to study the Holocaust. Why? We need to know about our history. We need to know that all the conflict we've experienced today is rooted in history. We need to know what pattern and behaviors to look out for in order to prevent anything like this from happening again. We need to know about specific people experiences, such as Anne's, so that we don't think it is something in history books, but it becomes personal. I believe that peace starts with you, with individual people. We must explore our own attitudes and find ways to express what we think and believe, as Anne did with her diary. We have to be able to understand our own way to peace. If you don't want to have conflict in the world, you first have to resolve conflict within yourself. Anne Frank explored her attitudes and believed deeply. We have to do the same. Not only do you have to address your own ideas about peace, you also need to help others find their violence, to support people in becoming kinder. Anne spoke of this often, and I will end with this quote. How lovely to think that no one need wait a moment. We can start now. Start slowly changing the world. How lovely that everyone, great and small, can make the contribution towards introducing justice straight away. And you can always give something, even if it's only kindness. Thank you.
Next one is a bit of a different story. Tobias, Ben, welcome. He is a student at the Desert Academy, and his head of school told me a while ago that Tobias visited the Anne Frank house in Amsterdam during this spring break, so a few weeks ago. And we thought that could be a great opportunity to ask him to share some of his impressions with us. So, thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me.
The first question, of course, was what was your impression of the Netherlands? I have to ask that.
Well, on your sheets it says that I'm here for a short interview, so I'm not going to be able to tell you all the incredible experiences I had, but I'll be able to tell you a few. First, the Netherlands is an absolutely beautiful, complex, and dynamic country. There is an incredible amount of history that I think many of us know at least some of from history books. But what makes the Netherlands so special is that they're not stuck in the past. It's not all about what they used to be. It's about who they are now and who they can be in the future. They embrace their history, but also develop who they are today. And this creates an incredible country of incredible technological brilliance, of people that are compassionate and understanding. It is an incredibly diverse country that is welcoming for visitors like myself. But there's much more than just history as well, and the people. The country itself is also physically beautiful. I mean, truly stunning. I visited the Rijksmuseum 3 times, and it's the 350th anniversary since Rembrandt died. And they are showing an exhibition of every Rembrandt that they own, prints, drawings, paintings. And the section that I found myself spending probably the most time in was actually the landscapes. Because despite how simple they might look at first glance, it's a really serene and calming, beautiful depiction of country life. And when one rides the incredible trains, I mean, believe me, the train system in the Netherlands is much better than that in much of the United States. One can look out the window and then remember what they saw at the Rijksmuseum. And it's the same thing. You look at a Rembrandt print and you look outside and you see that same beautiful country that inspired these brilliant humanists, that inspired them to think about humans and think about what we could achieve. So that's a really meaningful experience to be able to see that. Yeah.
You hear now why you got invited, you know. So anyway, I think you're looking at the next Consul General of the Netherlands there. A few months ago, you have been trained by the Anne Frank House. Trainers from Amsterdam came out to train the guides that will later help you through the exhibition here. And Tobias was one of them. And I'm just curious about what your experience was with that.
Absolutely. So the way that I look at being a docent for the Anne Frank exhibition, there are 2 aspects. There's preparation, and then there's actually doing it. And the preparation and the experience is much more than just the 3 days of giving tours. There is a personal journey that everyone goes through depending on how much they know about the Holocaust, World War I, World War II, and history. It really changes depending on who you are. So I have some background in history, but it was wonderful to be able to go back and get a refresher on the complexities of life, of the times. A lot of time when people think of history, they think of how simple it may have been back then. But no, it was just as complex as today. So in order to give a proper representation of Anne Frank of the times back then, it's important to know these complexities. So that was my personal journey, immersing myself in the times, reading sources like the Diary of Anne Frank, but also other testimonials from people who lived back then, reviewing the history books. So that was my personal journey that will stay with me like much else. But then there's the actual giving of the presentation, touring people through the exhibition. And when one is a docent, it's not about me, it's not about the docents, it's about the exhibition and ensuring that everyone who is there can get the most out of what they see before themselves. So what I tried to do is not think about myself, but make sure that I was able to tailor the experience to everyone who was there, because the story of Anne Frank needs to be told. As we've heard, terrible things are happening today that we can connect with and learn. We should have learned, but we haven't. And we need to learn. So that's the process of what it's like to be a docent, to make sure that we do learn, that everyone who enters leaves with a larger understanding of what has happened and what their role is in today's world in making sure things like this can never happen again.
Being in the Anne Frank House in Amsterdam a few weeks ago, can you tell us a bit what your experience was there?
It's an absolutely surreal experience. The Anne Frank House is incredibly complex. The organization, before I went there, I thought, the Anne Frank House is a museum like any other. But no, it's not. It's an international organization that has reaches across the world, as we see here. So that is one aspect of the Anne Frank House that impressed me and surprised me. As a museum, though, it's incredibly well curated, and I don't think I could imagine a better way to present Anne Frank's story. One detail that I remember, which was incredibly powerful, was, I'm not sure how many of you have used the audio guides that they give you in many museums, where you swipe the device in front of a panel, and then you put it up to your ear and you hear it. The Anne Frank House has this, but when you enter the secret annex, there are no more of those. And it's about what it's like to be in there. You get to be immersed without any distractions and try to recreate the life of Anne Frank as much as one can. So from a curatorial standpoint, that's absolutely brilliant. But then historically, the Anne Frank House was also, of course, where the Frank family and the Van Pels family lived. So that's something that my wonderful tour guide, Diana, kept reminding me. She took us to the main doorway, and everyone else, was going up the stairs, just walking by, because it was a doorway. Why would you stop there? And then Diana said, here's where the SS officers came in and took the Frank family. Here's where the Frank family left. Here's where the Van Pels left. You are standing where they stood. You are standing where they left for the last time and where they entered. And that's a truly incredible experience that only someone who is there can understand, I feel. So when going to this museum, it's not just about artifacts. It's about actually being where they lived. And I think that the Anne Frank House as well, through the artifacts, has just added to that immeasurably. And if you ever visit the Netherlands, and for some reason you're not in Amsterdam, take a one-day trip to Amsterdam and visit the Anne Frank House, because it's a life-changing experience.
Okay, the last question. Last question, Tobias. This exhibition is called Anne Frank, A History for Today. What do you think is the importance for today?
There are unfortunately too many answers to that question. There are three areas that I'll discuss briefly. One is anti-Semitism, the second is understanding history, and the third is, of course, what's happening today. In terms of anti-Semitism, I'm from a Jewish family, so it's something that's really close to our hearts. And I pay attention to the news quite often. And I see it, unfortunately, in a lot of countries. At the moment, the Gilets jaunes in France, the groups, far left and far right groups have joined them, and they have been spewing anti-Semitic remarks. There are members, I believe, in the Labour Party in the United Kingdom who have been able to induce a form of anti-Semitism in some of its members, and Jeremy Corbyn, unfortunately, has not been able to address this fully. And then, of course, in the United States, there's so much hate here. And in terms of anti-Semitism, in the most recent FBI report on hate crimes, of people targeted for religious reasons, 58.1 were against Jews. So anti-Semitism is not just a history from 70 years ago. It's absolutely a history today. Moving on to the second point, understanding history, which is another reason why the Anne Frank exhibition is so amazing, is because it inspires people to look back and feel how we played a role. There are countries like Poland and Hungary that are not addressing, in fact, erasing some of their involvement. Viktor Orban in Hungary, the Prime Minister, and the Fidesz party have run incredibly savage schemes to erase some of their compliance with the Nazis and have actually tried to promote and give awards to anti-Semites. The Law and Justice Party in Poland has enacted a law in which public dissent against the government by claiming that there was any involvement by the Polish nation in anti-Semitism, they've made that illegal. Our freedom of speech, which often goes unappreciated in the United States, is being stifled in this regard in Poland. And of course, Poland was ravaged, but there are many records of those who would point out to the Nazis, a Jew lives here, a Jew lives there, some who would go out into the streets and kill Jewish people. And these countries are not facing them. And then, of course, the third category, events today. And when thinking about events today, I remember a quote from Aaron, who was the person who trained me, and I had coffee with him in the Netherlands, and he said to me, "Never compare suffering. Suffering is suffering, and suffering is inexcusable." So I like to dwell on that when I think of today. It's not about, are more people suffering here? Are they suffering worse over here? It's the fact that people are suffering that needs to be addressed. And we didn't learn that historically. We didn't learn that from, unfortunately, we didn't learn that enough after the Second World War and the Holocaust. We didn't learn that from the Rwandan genocide, it seems. We didn't learn that from Khmer Rouge. And in terms of events today, in Xinjiang province in China, there are estimated to be between 100,000 and 1 million Uyghur Muslims who are detained in re-education camps by the Chinese Communist Party. And I'm not pulling these numbers out of a hat. This is an international phenomenon that has been addressed. And the reason why it's such a variable is because we just simply don't know enough about it. Because China has stifled foreign investigators, diplomats from visiting these areas. But we do know that there are hundreds of thousands of people in these re-education camps held against their will until they submit to whatever the Communist Party wants them to believe. And we've heard testimonials about other events in the world, but we just, in our daily life, need to remember that these events still happen and that we need to make our local politicians aware, our national politicians aware, make the international community aware that these events need to be dealt with. So that's why I'm very grateful that we have been able to do this with the Dutch government, who has been incredibly aware and passionate about spreading the right approach to dealing with issues in our world.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I don't know what your experience is, but when I hear these high school kids talking tonight, I get very hopeful about the future. For our last performance for the evening, and then I promise you delicious catering is waiting. We got here Emma Carter, sorry, and Isabel Gallegos. Did I say that right? Gallegos?
Gallegos.
Gallegos, okay. They will sing a part from the musical Wicked, which was a tremendous success on Broadway. Some of you may have seen it. They sing a song which is very appropriate to what we are talking about today. It's originally, you may know that Wicked is a musical that is made after The Wizard of Oz and et cetera, et cetera. I won't go into that story. But in the song, you will hear them singing that people come into our lives for a reason. Like events come into our life for a reason. bringing something to us that we must learn and help us to grow. And that's what this song is about.
I've heard it said that people come into our lives for a reason, bringing something we must learn, and we are led to those who help us most to grow if we let them, and we help them in return. Well, I don't know if I believe that's true, but I know I'm who I am today because I knew you. Like a comet pulled from orbit as it passes the sun, like a stream that meets a boulder halfway through the wood. Who can say if I've been changed for the better? But because I knew you, I have been changed for good. It well may be that we will never meet again in this lifetime. So let me say before we part, so much of me is made of what I learned from you. You'll be with me like a handprint on my heart. And now whatever way our stories end, I know you have rewritten mine by being my friend. Like a ship blown from its mooring by a wind off the sea, like a seed dropped by a skybird in a distant wood. Who can say if I've been changed for the better? But because I knew you, because I knew you, I have been changed for good. And just to clear the air, I ask forgiveness for the things I've done you blame me for. But then I guess we know there's blame to share, and none of it seems to matter anymore. Like a comet pulled from orbit as it passes the sun, by a wind off the sea, like a stream that meets like a seed dropped by a bird in the wood. Who can say if I've been changed for the better? I do believe I have been changed for the better. And because I knew you, because I knew you, because I knew you, I have been changed for good.
Thank you, guys. That was beautiful. closing. Thank you all for coming here tonight. We were with 350 people. That was very nice. We had a beautiful gathering. I hope you really enjoyed it. And thank you all for coming with so many. Santa Fe is a great town. Special thanks to Sarah, who was a tremendous help and really put this event out there on social media. And that drew your attention, and that's why you came. By the way, if you want to follow us, we're on Instagram and Facebook. It's called Anne Frank Traveling Exhibition, and there you can see a lot more. Thanks to the schools we're here who hosted this event. Thanks for the mayor for being here. We're very grateful for your presence here. Thanks especially now for Mika Chavez and the students of the Monte del Sol School who made a delicious appetizers or whatever you would call it for us here, and some drinks are in the back, and they will be walking around with plates with food and stuff like that, so that will be nice. There will be students that will be positioned at the different panels over there. Jan was taking care of it, I think. And so they will guide you through this exhibition if you're interested to see more of that. Thank you again. It was a privilege for all of us to bring this exhibition here to Santa Fe. Thank you.